The morning sunlight bathes the verdant peaks of Vulture Peak. The air is fresh, a gentle breeze stirs, and the mountain remains serene, accompanied only by the chirping of birds and the sound of the wind. The Buddha and his disciples gathered in this tranquil place to conduct their daily teachings. All gathered sat down, minds free of distractions, eyes fixed intently on the Buddha, listening to his boundless wisdom and teachings. However, this atmosphere of tranquility was disturbed by a gentle yet contemplative question. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, clad in divine robes, joined hands in reverence and spoke softly. Shakyamuni, after death, does one truly take rebirth? His words were gentle and steady, yet the questions within them revealed a philosophical riddle that has long troubled sentient beings. Birth and death, samsara, and rebirth. These seemingly distant and inscrutable questions have long sown seeds of doubt in the hearts of countless individuals. Since ancient times, whether common people or venerable sages and high monks, many have pondered the same question: where exactly does one go after death? According to Buddhism, is it true that after death one undergoes rebirth, entering a new cycle of life and samsara? Is the world after death a realm of suffering and pain, or an opportunity for awakening? People's confusion and fear of death stem from profound doubts about the unknown. All cultures and belief systems attempt to answer this question, yet remains a mystery that cannot be fully explained with simple words. In Buddhism, the cycle of the 6 realms of rebirth, samsara, is viewed as a continuous flow of life and death, where death serves as a gateway to a new life rather than an end. The destination of the soul or consciousness after death is determined by one's karma, the accumulated actions and intentions in past and present lives. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, Guanyin, reveals through compassion and wisdom that liberation from this cycle comes from cultivating compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom, ultimately leading to enlightenment and freedom from suffering. It is not only a challenge to the wisdom of the Buddha, but also a profound compassion for all sentient beings. He understands that only through profound awakening and consistent practice can one unravel the mysterious web woven by life and death. Instead of responding immediately, the Buddha spoke with a profound tone. The question posed by the Bodhisattva is the most profound topic among all phenomena in the world. The cycle of birth and death is indeed an eternal enigma in the hearts of countless sentient beings. He paused momentarily, his gaze sweeping around. The disciples' eyes followed the tone of the Buddha's speech, and the air seemed to solidify for a brief moment. Let me first tell you a story. The protagonist of this story is named Shanju. The Buddha's voice was deep and powerful as he slowly spoke. Shanju, the bhikkhu, is a practitioner endowed with wisdom. He is immersed in the world of meditation, and each session of contemplation brings him closer to the boundless truth. His cultivation has transcended the limitations of the material realm, entering a state beyond the physical body. One day, during deep meditation, he suddenly experienced a profound clarity of awakening. He seemed to transcend the river of time, entering a transcendent and ethereal space beyond life and death. The scene before him was overwhelming. Countless souls wandered between life and death, their fates entirely determined by the actions they performed during their lifetimes and the karma they accumulated. Shanjue observed that many souls did not immediately reincarnate after death, but remained in an invisible space, seemingly drawn by some force, continuously drifting without a place to settle. He saw that some people who practiced good deeds and accumulated virtue during their lifetime were reborn as human beings, living relatively stable lives, just as the merits they accumulated in their previous lives brought them corresponding rewards. Those who have committed evil deeds recklessly throughout their lives fall into even more painful realms after death, where their souls writhe in the flames of hell, enduring unspeakable torments. However, what shocked the venerable bhikkhu Ananda Even more was that he witnessed those souls who chose extreme methods to end their own lives at the moment of death. These souls have not attained liberation. Instead, by voluntarily relinquishing life, they endure even greater suffering. He saw souls one by one who chose to end their own lives because they could not bear the suffering of birth and death. Their wailing has never ceased. Their body and mind continue to wander in suffering. Those who once believed that ending all suffering was the choice, instead found themselves plunged into deeper confusion and pain. At this moment, Shanju experienced a profound jindong like never before. He understood the deep connection between life and death. The cycle of birth and death is not merely a simple process of reincarnation, but is fundamentally influenced by cause and effect and the workings of karma. He saw those souls unable to be reborn. Due to attachment, fear, and the failure to truly awaken, they remained trapped in endless suffering, seemingly unable to escape the shackles of samsara. The Buddha's voice once again softly echoed through the mountains and forests, and Shanjue, through this profound experience of meditation, perceived all of this. His eyes saw those souls who, after death, could not be reborn. They were trapped in extreme suffering, unable to attain liberation. The Buddha paused for a moment, as if to let each disciple feel the profound impact of good awakening and his deep insight into the truth of birth and death. The truth of samsara is far more complex than we commonly perceive. It is not merely a cycle of birth and rebirth, but a web woven from one's actions and karma in their previous lives. Each of us is influenced by our past actions and the choices made within our hearts. Whether good or evil, it will profoundly influence our future destiny. The words of the Buddha seemed to carry a certain power, making the surrounding air heavy, as if every syllable touched the deepest recesses of each disciple's heart. At this moment, the surrounding disciples all fell into deep contemplation. They began to understand that birth and death are not merely the end of the physical body, but are intimately connected with every action in each person's heart. The visions perceived by the wise reveal the profound truths underlying the cycle of birth and death. It also deepened their reflection on the meaning of life and the choices they make within it. The Buddha slowly said, "The destination of each person after death is indeed determined by the karma accumulated throughout their lifetime. The good and evil actions and intentions in one's lifetime will manifest different results after death. Those who fail to attain enlightenment will, after death, fall into endless confusion and suffering. Only those who have accumulated virtuous deeds and wisdom can transcend the bondage of birth and death, progressing toward a clearer, more luminous form of life." The Buddha's gaze gradually deepened as he continued. The experiences of Bhikkhu Subhuti are indeed profound, but there is another story that might help you better understand the truth of samsara and the cycle of birth and death. The Buddha's voice became gentle yet filled with warning, telling a story about a prince named Asura, whose experiences may offer you profound insights. The Asura prince grew up in an extremely wealthy kingdom, his life filled with power and pleasure. The wealth, status, and glory of the kingdom were the entirety of his life. He never pondered the meaning of death and even scoffed at the profound teachings of birth and death and causality. The Asura prince always believed that possessing enough wealth and power meant controlling everything. Life and death were merely an end. If one could obtain everything, then what was there to fear from death? However, fate is always unpredictable. Eventually, the Asura prince fell seriously ill, and his body began to rapidly decline. The very powers and pleasures that once allowed him to indulge recklessly suddenly seemed utterly meaningless. Facing the approach of death, the prince felt an unprecedented fear and helplessness. It was only then that he truly began to realize that the end of life was not as simple as he had imagined. A prince in despair sought the help of a venerable monk, hoping to find the path to liberation. Facing the venerable high monk, The Asura prince anxiously inquired, "Master, please tell me, how can I be reborn as a superior being after death? How can I escape the suffering of samsara?" He believes that as long as one can be reborn into a higher form of life through certain means, ultimate liberation can be attained. The venerable monk's gaze was calm as he slowly and firmly responded, "Prince, true liberation is not about reincarnation or escape, but about relinquishing attachment to life and truly awakening to the impermanence of birth and death. Life and death are not simply an end. True transcendence of birth and death is the transcendence of attachment to life, realizing that all phenomena are impermanent." However, the Asura prince did not comprehend the profound meaning of the master's teaching. He stubbornly insists that being reborn as a better person is the only path to liberation. Thus, the prince decided to renounce his life, believing that only through rebirth after death could he truly attain the liberation he sought. However, after the Asura prince died, his soul did not enter the higher form he had anticipated. On the contrary, he sank into a realm of darkness and suffering, unable to extricate himself. His soul floats in endless darkness after death, unable to find a trace of peace. Ultimately, his soul was drawn into hell, trapped in endless torment and suffering, bearing the heavy karmic consequences brought about by his greed and attachments during his lifetime. All present disciples were deeply shocked by this. The Buddha's voice was low and filled with warning. The Asura prince did not attain the rebirth he hoped for, but instead, due to his attachment to the change of life forms, fell into the abyss. His suffering does not arise from death itself, but from his attachment to life and his mistaken understanding of birth and death. The Buddha paused for a moment, observing the solemn expressions of his disciples, and continued, "The Asura prince failed to transcend the attachment to birth and death. It was precisely because he was fixated on the form of rebirth that he ultimately could not liberate himself from the cycle of samsara. True liberation is not escaping birth and death, but transcending attachment to birth and death. Only by realizing the impermanence of birth and death can one truly be freed from all attachments." This story deeply moved every disciple. The tragedy of the Asura prince is like a mirror, reflecting the attachments and misunderstandings of all sentient beings. They began to understand that reincarnation is not liberation from birth and death. True liberation lies in inner awakening and a profound understanding of impermanence. Through the warning of the Asura prince, the Buddha once again reminded his disciples that liberation from birth and death does not lie in avoiding or seeking rebirth, but in breaking the attachment to life. Only by transcending the fear and bondage of birth and death can one move toward true freedom and awakening. The teachings of the Buddha slowly resonate in the air, their sound calm and profound, as if embodying an inexhaustible source of boundless wisdom. All the disciples fell into deep contemplation, as if their hearts were touched by an invisible force, gradually beginning to realize the profound meaning behind birth and death. The Buddha quietly looked at them and then said, "True liberation from birth and death does not lie in escaping birth and death, nor in the form of rebirth, but in awakening. Only through the awakening of the inner mind can one transcend birth and death and attain true liberation." His words made every listener feel a refreshing stream flowing into their hearts, as if a beam of light had pierced through the inner fog. The Buddha continued, "What you perceive as birth and death is merely a form. Life is not simply the existence of the physical body. It is an impermanent web woven by the karmic causes and effects of the mind and the realization of awakening. True liberation is not the avoidance of the process of death, but a deep inner realization of the impermanence of life and death, letting go of attachment and fear towards them." The Buddha's gaze is profound, as if penetrating the hearts of sentient beings to perceive the deepest confusions and attachments within them. What you see is not merely the death of the body, but but also the continuation of causality and karmic results. Each individual's destiny is shaped by their actions, intentions, and karma throughout their lifetime. The process of birth and death is not merely a simple journey. It is a manifestation of the karmic consequences of the mind. Only by realizing this can one truly transcend the bondage of birth and death. It paused for a moment, smiled faintly, and said, "The fundamental issue of life and death lies hidden within the heart of each and every one of you. When you are able to transcend the attachment to death and perceive the impermanence and wisdom behind life, you can truly be liberated from the bondage of birth and death." The Buddha's gaze turned toward the distance, as if contemplating something. If you cling to the form of life and the existence of the body, you will be trapped in the cycle of birth and death, unable to attain liberation. You may believe that after death, one can be reborn into a higher form of life or escape the suffering of samsara. However, it is precisely this attachment that is the root cause of your inability to attain liberation. Because you are unable to see that birth and death themselves are not real. They are merely parts of impermanence. The disciples all bowed their heads, waves of emotion stirring in their hearts. They began to realize that birth and death are not a linear path of development, but an endless cycle in which each individual weaves their own web of destiny. The Buddha continued, "True liberation is not the escape from birth and death, but the profound awakening to the true nature of life. Only when you understand that birth and death are merely tests of spiritual awakening can you attain true freedom from them." He took a deep breath, seemingly guiding his disciples into a deeper state of meditative realization. You must understand that true liberation from birth and death lies in the transformation of the mind within, not in external attitudes. The liberation that transcends birth and death does not lie in seeking any particular rebirth, but in letting go of attachment to birth and death, and realizing the impermanence of all phenomena. Only when you see through this point, and no longer harbor fear and attachment in your heart, will true freedom arrive. The words of the Buddha flow into the hearts of each disciple like a clear spring, gradually washing away the doubts and confusion within them. In the eyes of Bhikkhu Shanming, a glimmer of light suddenly appeared as he understood the profound meaning behind the Buddha's words. Liberation does not mean abandoning the body or fleeing from death. Rather, it is the insight into the impermanence of birth and death, deeply letting go of fear and attachment to death from within the heart. His heart suddenly became clear and bright. All his confusions and misunderstandings at that moment transformed into a gentle breeze, drifting away with the wind. The voice of the Buddha resounded once more, proclaiming that whether one practices meditation or reflects inwardly, all spiritual cultivation ultimately points to a single goal: enlightenment. Only through awakening can one escape the cycle of birth and death and truly achieve inner freedom. He gently cast his gaze over the assembled disciples and smiled, saying, "The wisdom that transcends birth and death does not lie in abandoning life, but in penetrating the impermanence of birth and death through enlightenment. When you no longer cling to birth and death, and no longer fear death, the mind can find peace in impermanence and attain true freedom." The disciples fell silent for a moment, as the turbulent questions and profound shock within their hearts gradually transformed into a serene strength. They understand that birth and death are merely phases, and what truly deserves pursuit is the awakening and transcendence of the mind. The Buddha's teachings are like a bright lamp, illuminating their path forward and guiding them to find a true peace and freedom that belong to themselves in an impermanent world.